What's going on, everyone? Welcome to part 3 of our Build a Design System series, where today we're going to look at our radio button, our switch, our text area, our defined field, so complete with our pre-tab and our post-tab, our date picker or autocomplete, and then also show you how you can piece together all the components we've built thus far into some forms as well. Be sure to comment below what components you want to see built in part 4. Let's get started. Also, too, real quick, our community forum is now live, where you can ask any design-related question to the entire UI Collective community, from anything on design systems, stakeholder management, career advice, user experience, even design feedback. Any design related question you have, come and ask the UI Collective community.
All right, so let's get started building out our radio button. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and add a circle to the canvas, and we're going to make this 6 by 6. Depending on how you want your radio button to look or feel free to make this slightly larger, slightly smaller. It doesn't need to be 6 by 6, but that's just what we're rolling with for now. I'm going to go ahead and add a surface, set this to our surface primary, and then add an auto layout to it. We're going to leave the horizontal and vertical padding as they are for now at 10 pixels. But again, if you want to make your radio button a little bit larger or smaller, feel free to adjust this. It doesn't need to be 10 by 10. That's just what we're rolling with. And we go ahead and add a fill. This is going to be our surface action. Then we go ahead and add a stroke. On the outside, that's going to be, oh, come on. There we go. Which is going to be our border width of 2 pixels. And then one thing we want to have here is, we don't want to make this look like a checkbox. If we go into our border radius variables, the largest variable that we have is large. And to me, that's kind of almost too similar to what we did with our checkbox. So let's go into our local variables and let's add a larger radius here, so that we're really just going to call round, and we're going to set it somewhere in and around the 50. So if we go into our scale, let's maybe set that to the 1300, so it's that 52. So let's tie that back. Round scale 1300. There we go. So let's close this. And then let's modify this. So this is our round, and then I can see that's looking a little bit better. Let's also then go ahead and change the color of our border. So this is going to be our border action. There we go. Let's go ahead and call this our radio button for now. We'll come back and change that a little bit later on. Create the component of this, copy an instance for testing, and then there we have our initial radio button. What we're going to do next is actually look at adding some of our statuses. All right, now let's go ahead and look at adding some of our statuses. So let's go ahead and add a variant here, move our instance out of the way. Actually, let's delete that for now. And then let's position these a little bit to keep things nice and organized. So very similar to what you probably saw in our second episode, some main statuses that we're going to be working with. So our default, our hover, our focus, and our disabled. So let's go ahead and call this our status. Let's call this our default. And let's go ahead and call this our hover. So for our hover, the only things really changing is just the fill and stroke color. So our surface is going to become our surface action hover, and then our border is going to become our border action hover. And then there we have our hover. So for our focus, so very similar to what we did with a lot of our other focus components earlier on in episode 2, let's go ahead, add an ellipse, drop the fill, apply a variable where that border width is going to be equal to 2. On the outside, set the stroke color to our border focus, and then simply copy and paste that in. And of course, this is not right. So as you probably saw in episode 2, let's go ahead and use our absolute positioning tool to simply adjust this, try to get it 2 pixels on either side. And I was getting some questions on our focus component. So again, if you do have any questions, our community forum is now live, where I'll actually go in on our website, answer your questions, share questions with the community and other experts as well. So be sure to ask your questions there. Okay, sweet. So we try to get it to have 2 pixels on either side. I think we did a relatively decent job at that. There we go. Let's make sure, set this to left and right, top and bottom. Again, always add your constraints. It's just best practice. And then let's call this our focus. And then there we have our focus status. Beautiful. So next, let's look at our disabled. And what's going to be different about our disabled is that we're actually going to change the color of our ellipse on the inside. But before we go ahead and do that, let's go ahead. I realized I made a quick mistake here. So let me just hide our tags. We need to, first off, call our focus and our layers. Again, always naming your layers is always best practice. But one thing I actually didn't do when we were actually building our initial radio button is I didn't name the ellipse itself. So I'm actually going to go ahead, call this our selected across each of our different variants, just because ellipse 1 doesn't mean anything to a designer who's looking at your layers, but selected does. So this is just best practice. Apologies if I missed that a little bit earlier on, but that's the beauty about building design systems. You can make mistakes as you go. It's just about how you recover. Okay, so let's jump back to our disabled state here. So we're actually going to go ahead and set the stroke to our border disabled. Let's then change the surface to our surface disabled. And here we're actually going to adjust that selected element on the inside to our icon on disabled. There we go. So let's bring down this for testing. So I have our default, I have our hover, our focus, our disabled, and I think we're looking really, really good. What we're going to do next is actually add an inactive state. All right, so let's go ahead and add in our state variants here. So let's go ahead, add a new variant. That's going to be our state variant, and our default value here is going to be our active. So these are all of our active radio buttons. So let's go ahead, add just another row just for grouping things out. This is going to be our active, and then we're going to have another row for our inactive. Beautiful. So what we are going to do is let's go one by one here and just copy this down, and this is going to be our inactive. So when it comes to our inactive here, let's go ahead and actually hide that selected element altogether. We're then going to adjust our surface action to our surface primary, and then our border action to our border primary. Beautiful, just like that. Let's then go ahead, copy our defaults here, and then this is going to be our inactive hover. And then with this, we're going to go ahead, adjust the surface primary to our surface action hover 2. And we're going to leave the border as it is for now, just because it's the look and feel that we're going for. But what you can also do is set that to your border action hover. Actually, you know what? I actually don't really mind that. So we're going to adjust this in real time and go with our border action hover. Then for our focus, so very, very similar to what we did with above, is let's go ahead and call this our inactive focus. And one thing we can actually do, it's a little bit of a trick, don't tell anyone about it, as we can copy our focus from one and then paste it around the other just to save us some of that work. So there we have our inactive focus, and make sure that's selected is hidden. Yep. Make sure it's also hidden here. There's no surprises. Beautiful. And let's go ahead and just bring down our disabled. And this is going to be our inactive disabled. And then what we're going to do here is simply just, oops, I spelled that wrong. Inactive is simply just go ahead and hide that selected. So now when we test out, go to our instance here for testing, we now have the option to change between all of our different statuses and also our state variants as well, whether they're active or inactive. Beautiful. So now that we have our basic radio button, let's go ahead and piece together our radio button label. All right, what we're going to go ahead and do now is build out our radio button label. So let's take a symbol for testing here. Let's go ahead and call this our, just radio label, something like that. Let's set this to our body medium. Set this to our text body. Go ahead, select both. Add some auto layout to it. Make sure these are center aligned. And what we're going to do then is call this our radio button dash label. Oops, spelled that way wrong. Label, there we go. Let's go ahead, create the component of that, bring down a symbol for testing, and then let's go ahead now and add some of our properties to this. So the first thing we're going to want to do is actually slightly adjust our gap, now that I see it, is we don't want this to be set to fixed and fixed. We always like to set this to hug and hug, keep things nice and center aligned. And you're not always going to need a label. Again, preferably you always do, but again, there are those individual use cases where you might not need a label. So what we're going to go ahead and do is actually add in a label property or layer property that we're going to call label. So now on an instance, you can see that we now have the ability to show and hide that label. Now, your question now probably is if we don't need a label or we have the ability to hide the label based on our radio button label component, why would a designer ever need to pull in any of these components themselves? Can't they just do that just from the radio button label component? And that's a really good point. So with that, what we're going to want to do is actually stop these individual components from designers being able to pull them in. So what we're going to do is call these dot items. And with that period at the beginning, it just stops these from being viewed by designers when they're in their asset panel and going into pulling in. It just essentially just stops them from pulling in these components. They'll only have the ability to pull in this main component, but in their properties, they can show and hide that label. And again, if you have any questions about that, just feel free to ask on our forum. Let's then go ahead and add in a text property that we're going to call our label. And because we can't have properties that have the same name, let's go ahead and add in our downward arrow, just like that. So now I can show and hide that label. One thing we have lost, however, is the ability to toggle between all of our beautiful statuses and states that we built a little bit earlier on. So let's go ahead on our main component here and now add in those nested instances for the dot items. So now I can see I can show and hide that label. I can adjust it as well to say something like hello. And now I easily have the ability to adjust the items as well. And there we go. There you have your completed radio button component. All right, now let's go ahead and build out our switch component. So I'm going to go ahead and add in another ellipse, so very similar to what we did with our radio button, and set the height and width of this to 20 by 20. Let's change this to our surface primary, and then call this our knob. There we go. Now let's go ahead and add some auto layout to this. For this, what we're going to go ahead and do to start is we're going to set the width to 48 and the height of which to 26. And then let's simply adjust our horizontal padding here, and we can adjust our vertical padding as well if we want to. Let's then go ahead, add in a fill, which is going to be our surface action. And I can see this is already looking pretty good, like it's a switch. And then let's add a radius. Let's go ahead, add in our round radius to something like 52. And then let's go ahead and call this our switch. So what we're going to do to start is build in our switch if it's actually been selected. So we're going to align that to the right. And then let's go ahead and create the component of this and bring down an instance. One thing you also can do is you can actually wrap your knob in another auto layout container. So let's go ahead, add some auto layout there. And what that actually allows you to do is actually simply adjust that horizontal padding a little bit. If you don't want your knob so close to the edge. So we're going to maybe set that to 2, and I can see I can do that in either which way. So we're going to leave it at the right for now, because this is going to be our switch that is selected. And let's go ahead and also rename this to our knob. So if we look at our structure here, we have our switch, we have our knob, and then we have our knob, which is our ellipse. So beautiful. We have our basic switch component now. Let's go ahead and start looking at adding some variants. Now let's go ahead and look at building out our status variants. Now, one thing I realized that I didn't actually include here, and my apologies for this, is I did add a stroke. So we're going to have a stroke of 1 pixel. Let's go ahead and apply that variable, border width, just 1 pixel on the outside. And let's go ahead and set that to our border action. There we go. So my apologies there. And again, you're always going to make mistakes as you're building out your design system. It's just about how you recover. So let's go ahead now and look at adding some of our variants. So starting off, we have our hover, and then we also have our defaults. Let me just move these up. There we go. So very similar to what we did with our radio button. Let's adjust the surface action to our surface action hover, and then our border action to our border action hover. And again, if you always want to give your components a little bit of a different look or feel free to add in different colors or different shades for your border action hovers, maybe even a border action hover too, to make it a little bit more, that outline a little bit more defined. That's totally up to you. Okay, so let's go ahead, call this our status before we forget. This is going to be our hover. This one here will be our defaults, and just want to make that D lowercase. Beautiful. So now let's go ahead and add in our focus. And you should be an expert on focus states by now. So let's go ahead, add in a stroke, drop the fill, set the variable to stroke to border width. Border width is going to be 2 pixels on the outside. Let's set that to our border focus, and then simply copy, delete, and then paste in. Now, of course, this doesn't look right. So what you need to do is absolute position that outline, and then try to get it 2 pixels on either side. 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels. There we go. So let's now go ahead, add in that radius that we're going to set to our round value that we made when we were building out our radio button. Set the constraints of that to left and right, top and bottom, and then there we have our focus. What we're going to do now, add in our disabled. There we go. So with our disabled, we're going to change our surface action to our surface disabled. We're going to set our border action to our border disabled. And then let's set our surface, so the color of that knob, to our icon on disabled. There we go. So there we have our disabled selected status for our switch. Beautiful. So now that we have our status variants for our switch, let's go ahead and look at our state variants for our switch. Let's go ahead and add in some of our state variants here. So let's go ahead, add in another state variant. And the first is going to be our active. You can also do selected as well. If you prefer selected, unselected, we're going to go active and inactive. So let's call these our active. There we go. And I can see that they're all set to active. Now what we're going to do is bring one down. Let's focus on our inactive. Let's bring down our default here. And then this is going to be our default inactive. So what we're going to do to start is just reposition that knob itself. And then what we're going to do is change our surface to our surface primary. We're going to change the color of the knob itself. Where is it? Select our knob. There we go. So let's go look for a surface action. And again, this is where you can kind of pick and choose how you want your switch to actually look. So maybe you don't want it to be the surface action. Maybe if you even want it to be a little bit of a different color, you could use even something like this if you would like to. For the purposes of this exercise, though, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and set that simply to our surface action. Okay, so there we go. Let's then go ahead and bring in, so we have our inactive, but now we need our hover. So what we're going to do here, so our surface primary is going to become our surface action hover 2. Our border action is going to become our border action hover. And then our surface action is going to become our surface action hover. There we go. So then what we're going to do here is bring in our default for our focus. We have our inactive, and this is going to be our focus. And let's go ahead and copy in our focus, but let's be sure to rename our rectangle. So rename that to focus, paste it around, and then there we have our focus. And then for our, this should say our inactive, forgive me. Beautiful. And then simply for our disabled, what we are going to do is simply just adjust the positioning of our knob itself. And then there we have all of our different variants for our switch. So nice and easy, very, very similar to what we did with our radio button. So now if I bring one of these down for testing, I have all my different status variants I can choose from, and also the state variants as well. Next, what we're going to do is actually building out our switch label. And let's go ahead and build out our switch label. So let's maybe just set this back to our default active for now. And then let's go ahead and add in our label. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's make sure that's set to our body medium. Let's set this to our text body. Go ahead, select both, add some auto layout, and we're going to go ahead and call this our switch label. There we go, just like that. We can maybe adjust the padding a little bit to 12. Again, depending on how far away you want your label to be from your switch, you have that option. Let's then go ahead and create the component of this, bring down a symbol for testing, and then let's check this out a little bit. So one thing I see on our label here is that we have 2 pixels at the bottom that we don't have on the top. So let's just go ahead, set that to hug and hug, and then let's simply adjust here so that's aligned left in the middle. And now we can see we have 1 pixel on the top and bottom, which is looking pretty good. All right, perfect. So I think that's looking really good. Now let's go ahead and add in some of our properties here. So let's start off with a layer property for our label. Again, if you don't need that label at all, so let's call that our label. There we go. So now on our symbol, we can turn that on and off. And you're probably saying, isn't this very similar to our radio button, where if you have the ability to turn your label on and off, there's no need to pull in any of these components. You can do it directly from the switch label. And you are exactly right. So let's go ahead and call that our dot items. And if you have any questions on why we're calling that our dot items, be sure to leave a a question on our forum so everyone in the community can see that. And also, if they have the same question as well, they can answer it there. Okay, perfect. So there we go ahead. Now what we have, sorry, getting lost in my words here, is now let's go ahead and add in a text property. So let's call this our label. And because we can't have two properties with the same name, let's add that downward arrow to create that property. So now when I can turn that label on and off and also adjust that label as well. There we go. So now we have our switch component. All right, so now let's look at building out our text area component. So this is going to be very similar to what we did when we were building out our input component. So let's go ahead and add in some of those elements. So start off with a field. Let's go ahead, add in a label. And let's basically just recreate what we did with our input. So that said, we also need to add in some hint copy, set this to our body medium, our text body. Let's make sure to adjust this. Let's select all three, add some auto layout, set the gap to 8. We're going to call this our text area. There we go, just like that. And let's set everything. So that's set to fill. Let's set this to hug. There we go. And let's also set this to fill as well. And so when it comes to your text area, is never really going to be one size. And maybe you're not too sure about the specific use cases of your text area yet. Maybe if someone's just filling out a simple contact field, maybe your text area is this size, but maybe if it's, a little bit longer, someone's not just filling out a contact form, they're filling out an actual application, they need that text area to be much larger where they can actually go in and enter a lot of that information. So we're actually going to go ahead and modify this component itself. So let's create the component of this, bring a symbol down for testing. And I can see right away that as I expand my component to the right, the form follows with it. So the field follows with it. If I extend it down, nothing actually happens. So with that, what we need to do is go into our main component and set our field to fill container. And now what I see is that depending on the use case for my text area itself, I can adjust this component and that's always going to match. Now, one thing that you are probably looking at here is also that you always want the label to be at the top left. You don't want it to be in the center or at the bottom. That's just kind of obvious. So what we can do on the main component itself is simply set top left, align those elements top left. So now they're aligned. So there's basically the overall structure of our text area component itself. We're still going to go ahead and make some modifications to it, and we're going to do that next. Let's go ahead and spruce up our text area a little bit. And part of this is going to be a little bit complex, so bear with us as we troubleshoot. It's something I actually very rarely get right the first try. I always need to do a couple of shooting sessions, but we're going to do that together. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're actually going to build out our own custom icon. And you might have seen this in some the text areas that you've worked with in the past. Is just an icon that sits at the bottom right like that to let the user know that they can drag it down, drag it right if they need a little bit more space. So let's go ahead and recreate that. So if you've never created an icon before, we do have some good lessons on icons, so be sure to check that out. So let's set our border width to 1 pixel, and let's set this to our border primary. Let's then go ahead and union this selection and then add some auto layout and drop the gap and the padding entirely. All right, so let's then rename this to our expandable. And then let's simply copy and paste it in, and then use our absolute positioning to position it at the bottom right. So this is where things get a little bit complex, because if I take an instance here and I expand this out and expand it down, look what happens. It just sort of stays there. Now, your first instinct might be to simply just use the constraints to set that to your right, and I can see that adjusts, and I can set that at the bottom, and that adjusts as well, and that's good in theory. But what if I want to add a character count to this text area? Look what happens. So if this becomes our character count, and we'll add our properties and all that stuff a little bit later on. So if this becomes our character count now, look what happens. That expandable just stays in the same place and almost follows it down with it. And we don't want to have that happen. So let's go ahead and troubleshoot this in real time. So first off, maybe let's bring our expandable up. Let's get rid of our instance here, and let's just rearrange our layers. So we have our character count here. We have our expandable. We have our field. What I always like to do is add an auto layout wrapper for both of them. So I group them all within one itself. And when I do that, what tends to happen is you tend to lose that absolute positioning. So now when I have that add back that absolute positioning, I can see it's there. It might be a little bit too tight. 1 pixel on either side. Set the constraints of that to right and then bottom, or 2 pixels on either side as best we can. So now let's go ahead and try that out. So when I expand this out and I expand it down, then what happens is that expandable follows with it and still leaves room for some character count. Sometimes what might actually happen is Figma might decide to actually add in just randomly some padding here. When you do that, it's like 2 pixels, 2 pixels. Some have even seen 2 and 7 pixels. And it tends to mess up your layout a little bit. For whatever reason, we didn't have to do it right here. But when I was just building out this component just as a test a little bit earlier on, I was getting some weird things that I had to troubleshoot. So if this doesn't work for you, just go into your layers and play around with your alignment here, your horizontal and vertical resizing until you find a combination that works. Because sometimes you might see some Figma bugs when you do that approach. Okay, so now that we have that all set up, let's go ahead, let's delete our instance here. Let's go ahead, rename this to our field. And then let's go ahead and start adding some of our properties now. So we have our character counts. So let's start off with our hint copy. Again, so very similar to what we did with our input components. You might not always need this hint copy. So let's add a hint copy layer property. So then on a symbol for testing, I can hide that hint copy and I can see that our field adjusts with it and that expandable still stays in place. So there we go, just like that. Okay, so then let's add a text property for that hint copy, hint copy, hint copy. Oops, so let's add that little downward arrow because we can't have properties with the same name. There we go. So hint copy. So I can show that hint copy, then change hint copy as well. Beautiful. And let's do the same with that character count. So maybe you don't always want that character count to be showing. So let's go ahead and add a layer property for our character count. And then, of course, we also want a text property for that character count as well. Character count. There we go. So let's emojis and symbols, add that downward arrow. There we go. Character count. So now I can see I can show and hide that character count. I can show and hide that hint text, show and hide that character count. And there we go. I think we're in some good shape, but we did actually lose some of our nested instances here. So some of our other properties. So let's go add some nested instances for our field and also for our label as well. So now I have those great properties that we created in the second episode of this series associated with it. So there we go. There we have our text area component. And now let's go ahead and build out our defined field. If you are not too sure what a defined field is where you kind of have sort of this tab before the field or after the field. You know, maybe if you have a website, you might have www dot here, so the user can't actually adjust that. They know it's a website. They know only to enter in sort of like what that base URL would be, like uicollective.co. So you've probably seen them in the past, or maybe just didn't know that they were called defined fields, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead and build them together. And to do this, we're actually going to jump back to our field component because we're going to be working a lot with this field component, and you'll see why a little bit later on. Okay, so let's go ahead and start building out our defined fields for our pre-tab and our post-tab. So pre-tab is what would come before the field, and your post-tab is what would come after. So let's go maybe use the URL example, www dot, and I already have this heart icon ready. So we'll go with that, and let's adjust here. So let's set our hug, our www to hug and hug, and let's be sure to match the auto layout that for our pre and post tab as we did with the field itself. So we have a gap of 8, horizontal padding of 12, and vertical padding of 8. So this will be 8, this will be 12, and then this will be 8. Let's see what colors we put in here. So we have an icon primary and a text disabled. Let's do the same. So icon primary, and then you got your text disabled, rock and roll. Okay, so let's then go ahead and add in a surface disabled. Let's call this pre-tab. pre-tab, dot pre-tab, and we're calling it dot pre-tab because, again, you don't want designers to be able to pull these pre and post tabs individually. You want them to be able to pull in the defined field themselves. So adding that period at the start is going to hide this when you're publishing. And maybe I'll just call this pre-tab, capital T. Okay, so let's create the component of this, copy an instance, and now let's go ahead and add our properties. So starting with our icon, of course, we need a layer property. So we're going to call this icon, and then also an instance swap property as well. And because you can't have two properties with the same name, if you know me by now, you know I like my downward arrow. Boom. Awesome. Then let's go ahead and do the same for the text as well. So starting with a layer, let's call this our label. Yeah, sure, we'll go label. And then let's add the text property as well. Label, you know the drill by now. Say it with me. What do we need? We need a downward arrow. So downward arrow. Boom. Just like that. Look how easy that was. Okay, so now we can hide that icon and we can hide the label as well. And if you don't want to be able to hide both, so be sure to set that in. Be sure to call that out in your documentation. So now that we have our pre-tab, let's go ahead and let's add some variants here. So there's only two variants that we're actually going to add. One thing that is pretty common for you to see when you're working with pre-tabs and post-tabs, again, depending on who's setting it up, is you might actually have a variant here for your icon, where it's just an icon pre-tab, and then you might have one where it's just text, and then you might have another that's icon with text. That's an icon with text, icon and text. Again, I've seen this as a setup in the past, but just in terms of simplicity, I'm just combining them both together. So that's why we're doing things this way. So when it comes to the variant, so this is going to be our status. So our first here is going to be our disabled. So this is going to be our disabled, and then this is going to be our active. So active might signify that there's a specific action that you can take associated with the field, whereas the disabled, it's really just www dot. It's really just more informative. So if you're not too sure the specifics around that, bear with me. I will get into that a little bit later on. So with this, what we're going to go ahead and do is just adjust this to your surface action. And then we're going to change this to our text on action, and then change this one here to our icon on action, just like that. And let's be sure to add in our labels here, just so we know. So we have our disabled, and then we have our active. Beautiful. Active, just like that. Sweet. So there we go. We now have our pre-tabs all set up with the associated variants. And next what we're going to do is build out our post tab. Okay, so now that we have our pre-tab, let's go ahead and build out our post tab. And they're really just going to basically be the same. So we can just copy one component group from the other. Just be sure to rename this to post tab. And the only real difference is that we're actually just going to delete the text label. You can have a text label if you want. I'm not saying you shouldn't or you don't need to. I'm just deleting it because usually whenever I work with post tabs, I don't really have a label. It's always usually an icon, like a calendar icon or something like that, for if it's a date picker, which we'll get to a little bit later on in this lesson. And if you have any questions on why we're doing this, feel free to leave your questions on our UI Collective community forum so the whole community can answer and see your question as well. Okay, so that's really just about it for our pre-icon, for our post-icon, because we have our disabled, we have our active states already. The variables are all going to stay the same, but because we did actually remove our label, we can go ahead and get rid of these properties here. Oops, I deleted the wrong one by accident. Let's not do that. There we go. So let's get rid of our label. And because you only have one element here, which is your icon, it's not like it's a button where you have an icon left, an icon right, and some text as well. What we can actually do is get rid of that layer property overall. So I'll show you what I mean. So we can actually get rid of the layer property to turn on and off that icon, because that's actually not needed anymore. You're always going to have an icon if you have a post tab with it. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. And then what we can do is we can remove that downward arrow that we love so much from our instant swap property. So now we can have, so it's just icon in our status. Beautiful. So we now have our pre and post tab. We might come back to these and make some changes as we're actually building out our defined fields, but let's go ahead and look at that next. So now let's go ahead and actually start building out our defined fields themselves. So what we're going to do to start is let's simply bring down an instance here of our field, and let's bring down a pre tab, and let's bring down a post tab. So let's select all three of those. Sorry, I'll zoom way in here for you. And what I'm going to do is get rid of this, and we're going to move ourselves up here just to the right. So let's go ahead and call this our defined field, and then let's drop the gap entirely so they are nice and aligned. Now, what is it we notice right away? So when we zoom in, we can see that all of a sudden there's our elements aren't totally in line. Like there's that 1 pixel where that border is on the outside. We also notice here that the edges aren't really flush like this. The curvature is on our field is a little bit different than what's on our defined field. So let's go ahead and start addressing some of these elements here. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and add a stroke that's on the outside 1 pixel, and we're going to set that to our border primary. So when we do that, what do we notice? Now all of a sudden, all of that border is in line with each other, and I'll get rid of that guide here. So that border is actually in line with each other. So with that, again, what's another thing that we notice here? Any guesses? So we see here that this overlaps a bit, and that's fine for now. We'll come back and address that a little bit later on. But the other thing that we notice is that our field actually has this nice curvature to it, but our edges don't. So at our defined field level, we're actually going to go ahead and apply those radiuses, our radius of 4. And when we do that, let's be sure to go ahead. Let me zoom in. Let's be sure to clip our content there to keep that consistent. And when we do that, so if I go here and I hide it, then all of a sudden that curvature stays. So if I show or hide, there's always going to be that 4 pixel on the left-hand side there. Okay, so other thing that we noticed too is that now that we have this curvature at the end, we no longer need the curvature at our field level. So what we're actually going to do is just go ahead and drop the radius there to 0. Now, let's go ahead and take a quick look at how to deal with the issue of now all of a sudden this element here not having a border. So if we remove that up, that doesn't do anything. So I think what we're going to do is let's go ahead and actually just... let me double check something here. Nothing went astray. Let's actually add a 1 pixel border to the left-hand side of our post tab and to the right-hand side of our pre tab. So we don't have any issues there. So let's select both. Let's add a stroke on the left side, which is going to be 1 pixel. So border width of 1 pixel. We are going to assign that our border primary. And let's do the same for this one as well. So a stroke on the right side, on the outside, apply the variable width of 1 pixel, and we're going to set that to our border primary. So let's go back to our main component here. And now I can see that our borders overlap. So it's nice in unison, and we only have 1 pixel. And now all of a sudden we have our border back here as well. Another thing that we can do if we wanted to, we could also add that same type of border here, but because there's a little bit of a different color, I think it might add some differentiation already. So I'm actually not too phased with that. So let's go ahead and create the component of this. Let's bring down a symbol for testing, and now let's go ahead and start adding some of our properties here. So at the defined field level, let's select our pre-tab, and let's add a layer property for it for show pre-tab, and the same for our post-tab. Layer property, create property, show post tab. And now what we have here is we can hide those. And we hide that, we can see that regardless to the fact that we set our radius in our field to 0, we still have that nice curvature around the corners. And then let's do the same with our post tab. And of course, this hides both. And then what do we have here? We really just have a basic field component. So just be sure to call it on your documentations that you don't have pre or post tabs. Then you should be using a field level. You should be using the defined field themselves. Okay, let's be sure to also add our nested instances for our pre-tab, our post-tab, and our field. So then when we hit our defined field, we now have all the awesome properties that we set before. Awesome. So now that we have our defined field out of the way, let's look at actually adding some variance to our defined field. Okay, so now let's go ahead and actually look at adding some variance to our defined field. And when we were building this, I actually made a very purposeful mistake because I wanted to show something to you. And this happens a lot of time when designers are building out design systems, is if I take my instance here, and let's say maybe this was in an error state, our field was in an error state, right? So if we change this to something like error, maybe you also want to have some error here on your pre-tab and then also your post-tab. So this is why it is also super important to have specific variance for the defined field as a whole. So you can have variance at the pre-tab and post-tab level, but then you might also want some variance at the defined field level itself to give you some additional options. And when you do that, you want your pre-tab and your post-tab, those colors to also adjust with it. So if you select error for the defined field, you're also going to want to have your pre-tab and post-tab, those colors to also adjust. So what we're actually going to do now is let's go ahead and break our field component. So we no longer have those options. That said, we do still need to go through and actually, so we no longer have those properties, but now we need to add those properties back because we wanted to disconnect them from the original component. So let's start off with our, what do we call it up here? So this is our placeholder. So let's call this our placeholder. Do we have a label for our placeholder? No, we didn't. I should have known that. But so what we have here, so this is going to be our placeholder. So we just have our text for a placeholder, and then we have our icon left. So then we have icon left. Make sure to add your instance swap here for your icon left. Icon left. There we go. Edit, emojis and symbols, arrow. Icon left. Let's also have a layer for your icon right. Icon right. Add in the instance swap for your icon right. Icon right. And again, when it comes to this component, there's a ton of different ways that you can go ahead and set this up. I'm only showing you one way, which I've seen in the past and I've used in the past. They tend to work pretty well for me. Okay, so what we have here is we have our pre-tab, we have our post-tab, we have our placeholder, we have our icon left, icon right, and we have the individual variants for our pre-tab. And for some reason, and whatever reason, these decided to get messed up. So let's be sure to adjust those. And now we're rocking and rolling. Okay, so now on our placeholder, now on our instance of our defined field, we now have all those properties back, but they're disconnected from what we did originally. So now they are their own component. Again, we still do have the option to change and modify our pre-tab and our post-tab. What we're almost going to do with these variants is actually override them. So you can revert back to your disabled or active if you would choose to. And the reason why we didn't, we're not going to add all the variants here in our pre-tab and post-tab is we want all the colors to change at the defined field level. So you're only changing one variant, only changing one property, to adjust your pre-tab, your field, and your post-tab as well. And that is what we are going to look at next. Now let's go ahead and set up our defined fields variants themselves. So we're going to do very similar to what we did up here. Let's go ahead, add a variant here. And we're going to do them again for, what was the terminology we used up here? So our not filled and our filled. So let's move our instance out of the way. Bring these back down. Something like this. Bring these back down. So let's just set them up. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3, 4, 5, and then 6 here. Just like that. Okay, so sorry, I should have done some of the formatting before. Bear with me, but I'll give you guys time to make the same formatting adjustments as I do this. All right, so then let's bring down a copy here. So we have our not filled and then our filled. Let's just ungroup these and just make sure they're nice and lined. So we have our default, we have our hover, we have our focus, we have our error, we have our success, and then we have our disabled. Okay, so let's drag this down. All right, we're now in some good shape. So what we're going to do is for our default, what we're actually going to do is just really, because we really have just the same styles as we did up here, we're really just going to leave this the same as it is. So you'll notice that for some of these, we're not really going to be adjusting the colors of the pre and post tab really at all. So let's be sure and go ahead first, and let's call this our status, and then this will be our default. And then for our hover, let's go ahead and take a look here. So for our hover, the only thing that changed in the field itself is going to be the icon color themselves. So let's just simply change the colors of these icons. So these will be our icon action hover, and the color of the text didn't change. It did not. So it's going to be our text on disabled. What you can also do is you can even, if you wanted to, is let's see what we did up here, is you can maybe even adjust the color of the text or even a little bit of the border. If you can give it another one if you want to. But I'm just going to leave them at just changing the colors of the icon for now. All right, so then for focus, what we're going to do is the same as the default. And what we can actually do is just copy our focus state that we did up here and paste it in around this focus state. And then let's be sure to, I don't know why that didn't work. Okay, so maybe we won't do that. We're going to change their approach. And let's go with the stroke, fill. Let's just sort of recreate it here. So we have our border focus. Apply the variable, our border width of 2 pixels on the outside. 2 pixels, not 1. 2 pixels on the outside. And let's go ahead and apply our radius, our 4. And then let's copy and paste it around. Of course, that's not right. So use our absolute positioning. And let's position it 2 pixels on either side. So we have our 1, 2, our 1, 2. And one thing I noticed here is, let's see what's up with this. This is a really, really interesting one that we're going to have to work with here. So let's go ahead and troubleshoot it. What do you notice? We noticed right away that our clip content is actually stopping us from seeing that individual focus state. If we bring it to the top, still nothing in the layers. So this is where we need to get creative. So let's unclip that content. We can see that now all of a sudden, let's go ahead and actually make sure that our focus is 2 pixels on either side. So 1, 2. 1, 2, then 1, 2. And we also have our 1, 2 on this side as well. Let's set those constraints to left and right and top and bottom. And what we're going to do at the focus level is we're actually going to override our radius here. So we're actually going to apply a radius here for our pre-tab of 4. At the bottom, radius of 4. Just like that. And then we're going to do the same at the post tab as well. So really just forcing that radius. And this is where sometimes there really is no easy way to do it. You kind of just got to get creative here and hope for the best. Okay, so now let's just bring this down real quick. Let's just do a little bit of testing. We didn't want to create another one. Let's bring this back up. And let's just do, my properties got all messed up again. So let's maybe just show that pre-tab. We can see that focus state adjusts with it. So I think we're looking pretty good there. Okay, so what I noticed is that our properties did get all messed up again for whatever reason. Figma's really got to fix that. Placeholder, show post tab, icon right, icon left, and then our icon left. Let's back up. There we go. Okay, so there we have our focus, and then for air, this is where we're going to make some adjustments here. So let's go maybe we change the border here to our border air, and then maybe if we want, what we can also do is we can adjust the colors of these icons as well. So this is where you kind of get a little bit tricky with it. You can kind of pick and choose what you want to have as your air itself. You can have all of these items as your air. You can maybe just have these as your individual air. So maybe if we just change our icon to our icon air, maybe if we go with our text to a text air, something like that. And then we can maybe just change this to our icon air. Now, one thing that you're probably realizing is something that I should probably change here is if you're using a pre and post tab, you might not have the icons in the middle. So what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to hide these by default just to make that a little bit cleaner looking. So now you can see why we're adding the colors at the field level to the icons, because again, why would you have icons in the middle of your field? if that makes sense. So let's now go ahead and do the same with our success. So let's override. Let's change the icon to our icon success. Change the text to our text success. Then we got our text success. Maybe we add a border all the way around from our border success. There we go. I think we're looking in some decent shape. And then what we're going to go ahead and do is modify the disabled as well. So let me double check here. So we have our icon primary. Maybe if we go this icon on disabled, and maybe we can go this our text. What do we do up here? Let me just double check. We'll leave that text disabled for now. And we change this to our icon on disabled. There we go. So we have our first group of defined field variants. All right. Beautiful. So next, what we're actually going to go ahead and do is complete the filled in variant group. So now that we have our first set of status variants, there's a couple of mistakes that I made. I just need to want to go back and address. So the first off is that I didn't actually originally rename our status variant. So make sure to always name your status variants properly, whether it's default, hover, focus, error, success, and then disabled. And the other thing I didn't do is I didn't actually add in the hover effect for the border on our hover. So this will become our border primary to our border action hover. So my apologies with that. Now let's go ahead and let's create another variant group here, which is going to be our state variants. And so these are all going to be our not filled. Again, matching the naming conventions that we did with our fields. We have state not filled and then filled. And what we're going to do is really just copy all of these down, and then these are going to be our filled. So let's go back and refresh our memory here as to what we did originally. So we have our, this became our text body, whereas before with the not filled, it's our text disabled. So our default here, one thing we're going to do is just go back and re-show the icons. I'll hide those a little bit later on. So this will become our text body, and any change to the icon color, they're still our icon primary as well. Beautiful. So then for our hover, what we have here is we have our surface action hover. So I'm only going to apply that at the individual field level. So this will become our surface action hover 2. For some reason, that's not letting me. Let's try it down here. There we go. So that's a surface action hover 2. And this will become our text body. Let me just double check our text body. And then with our focus, same thing. So as we did with our defaults, we are going to do the same here. So the only change is that this becomes our text, our text body. And then with our error, let's see what we have. So this becomes our text body as well, our text body. These become our icon error. Again, you don't necessarily need to show your icons here. If you have your defined field, we're going to anyway. I don't think it personally looks the best, but it is what it is. And then let's go ahead and add in that surface as well. So that's surface error. Sorry, lots of me jumping back and forth here. I do apologize for that. Okay, so then let's go ahead and do the same with this one. So this becomes our text body. Let's go ahead, add in that surface success. And then the color of our icons also did change. So the icons become our icon success. And then for our disabled text body, or text on disabled, icon on disabled. So text on disabled, and our icon on disabled. Icon on disabled. And what we have here as well, we have our surface disabled. This becomes our surface disabled. There we go. So now let's go ahead and just hide the icons in our field, just because I think it is a little bit ugly. And there we go. So now we have all of our variants for our pre-tab and also our post-tab. So let's go through and just do some quick checks here. So of course, our properties got all messed up again. So show pre-tab. Oh, actually, no, they didn't. My apologies. So we have our icon left. We have our icon right. Again, those hidden by default. We can show that post-tab or not. And when I do that, I can see that our corner radius stays the same. I can show our pre-tab. That also adjusts as well. When I show that pre-tab, we also do have all of our different properties that we can adjust. And again, it's really important here, if you want to change the colors of these, to do it at the status level, because what that's going to do is that's going to, where's a better example here? Let's go with our error. is that's going to change everything associated with the component as a whole. It's not only going to change, this is our area filled, it's not only going to change, a field pre-tab or post-tab, it's going to change the component as a whole. You will still do have the ability to override the status here in your pre-tab or post-tab if you would want to. But again, just be sure this is where training is really important with your designers, because defined fields are a little bit more of an advanced component when they should or should not be overriding any of what I like to call sort of the master variant here. And again, this can be a really confusing component. So if you do have any questions on it, leave those on our community forum so the community as a whole can answer and also have insight into your question as well. Okay, so we're not done just yet. We have our defined field component, but what about our defined input component? And we're going to look at that next. Now let's go ahead and build out our defined input. So let's bring down a symbol, copy and delete, and let's go into our input field that we built in an earlier lesson, and then add a variant. So what we're going to do, bring down 1. We're going to set this to, where is it here? Our property 1 to type. This one here will be our default field, and then this one will be our defined field. Then what we're going to do is really just paste in that field that we copied, delete the old, adjust some of the auto layout here. And then what we can maybe do is we can also just get ourselves started off with for something like https ... for that pre-tab, and then hide that icon if we wanted to. And maybe you also even want to just hide that post-tab to start off with. Awesome. And then there it is, that simple. You now have your defined input. So I can swap between my defined and my default. And one thing I noticed here is our labels got a little bit messed up, or properties, excuse me. So now we can hide our hint copy, and we can swap between our defined and our default, and all the other properties stay the same as well. So there it is. You now have your defined input. All right, now let's go ahead and build out our date picker. So what I'm going to do is just add some text to the canvas here. Let's just say maybe call it 27, zoom all the way in here. And let's just go ahead, add some auto layout real quick, set that to hug and hug. And one thing I'm actually going to do is just make it fixed. So I'm going to drop all of the gap, all of the padding, and just make it 24 by 24. I'm then going to call this our dot item, which we're going to combine to build out the actual date picker components. And let's add some colors here. So no stroke for now. So for fill, we're going to go with our surface primary. And for the color of our text, this is going to be our text body. Just like that. Beautiful. So we now have our first date picker item. Let's now go ahead and start looking at all of our different variants before we piece together our date picker. All right, awesome. So now let's go ahead and actually build out the rest of our variants. Now there's one thing that I realized that I didn't do, silly mistake. I didn't actually add in our radius here. So we're going to set that to our medium 4. Okay, so there's all these different types of status variants that we'll look at. So our default, our current, our hover, our focus, our disabled, and then our blank. And then we're also going to look at our unselected, and if that date marker is actually selected as well, that's going to be our second state variant. So to start things off, let's go. So we have our default, and let's be sure to rename our properties here. So this is going to be status. This one's going to be our default. This is going to be our current. And with our current, what we're going to add is just a 1 pixel stroke on the inside. And be sure to apply that variable. 1 pixel stroke on the inside, and this is going to be our border action. There we go. Let's then go with our hover. So with our hover, let's go ahead and change this from a surface primary to a surface action hover 2, and the text body to the text action hover. Let's then look at a focus. So very similar to what we have done, or the exact same to what we have done with all of our other focuses in the past. This is going to become our border focus. Apply the variable or radius, set that to 4. There we go. On the outside, or not border width of 4, sorry. We're going to set to 2 pixels as the border width, and then the radius is 4. That's where I got tripped up. Radius is 4. There we go. We're going to copy, paste, and then be sure to use your absolute positioning tool to get it 2 pixels on either side. And be sure to set those constraints to left and right and top and bottom, just always best practice. So there we have our focus. There we go. And let's look at our disabled. So if you can't select this date, so this is going to become our service disabled, and our text body is going to become our text on disabled. And then lastly, we're going to have a blank, and I'll give you a good example a little bit later as to what this is for. So this is going to be our blank, and we're really just going to hide that altogether. So we're not going to have a fill here. You can, if you want to. Actually, maybe I'll just take this, the fill entirely away for now, because that's probably will serve as a little bit of a better example a little bit later on. Awesome. So all of a sudden we have our first set of status variants. Next, we're going to go ahead and look at our state variant. So whether it's unselected, which we already have, or also our selected. Okay, so now let's look at our selected variant. So for this, we're going to add another state variant and make our default to unselected, which is that first group of items that we built. So those are all our unselected. And now let's bring another of this down. And this will be our selected. So for our selected, actually we'll go one by one to start. So this is going to be our default selected. And we're going to adjust the colors here from our surface primary to our surface action and our text body to our text on action. With our current, what we're going to do here is we're actually going to, so this is going to be our current. So that if this is our current, so it's going to look exactly the same in theory as our default, except what we're actually going to do is just always be sure to rename that rectangle. So we're going to copy our focus, and we're simply just going to paste it around. So it's going to be very, very similar to our focus component. And what you'll see is they're actually end up being the same. So the current and the focus are going to be the exact same. So there we have our current. Oops, sorry. This is our current, and then this is our selected. Same. Make sure I didn't make that mistake. So this is our default selected. Perfect. Default selected. Current selected. All right. Then we have our hover. So let's change our surface action to our surface action hover, and then our text on action to our. Actually, we'll leave that as is for now. I was thinking about maybe inversing it, but we'll leave that as is. This is our selected hover. Then with our focus, it's going to be exactly the same as our current. So this is going to be our selected focus. Then with our disabled, maybe if I bring this down, so really just going to inverse the colors here. So to make it a little bit darker, so this is going to be our selected disabled. And what I mean by that, our surface disabled is going to become our surface disabled selected. And then our text is going to become our text on action, just like that. And then our blank, of course, is going to stay the same. So beautiful. Let me just do some checks here. So default, current, hover, focus, disabled, and then blank. And we also have our unselected and our selected state variants as well. So there we have all our items. And now I think we're ready to start piecing together our date picker. Now let's go ahead and build out the calendar for our date picker. But one thing I actually had forgot to do that I just went ahead and added here is really just a text property for each of the individual dates on the inside of these. You can select them all using the multi-select feature to bulk add that property, but that's something I did just go ahead and do. Okay, so now let's go ahead and build out our calendar here. So we're going to start off with a week. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to call this a week. And now we're going to copy and paste our week. But first, actually, let's adjust the gap of this to 8. Let's adjust the gap of this one to 8. Then we're going to add a week below, add those in an auto layout, and then paste until we have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. And then these are going to be our weeks. I'm then going to go ahead and adjust the gap of those to 8. And now something you might be thinking about right now is, how do I know which date is which? Is this a Sunday or is this a Sunday? What's that look like? So using one of our weeks, we're going to bring that above and simply just, instead of having them as numbers, they're going to signify what dates these are, or what days. So this is going to be a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then also a Saturday as well. Let's then go ahead and bring these in an auto layout. Just like that. Let's adjust the gap of those to 8. And we're going to leave that like that for now. Actually, no, we're not going to wrap those in auto layout just yet. Forgive me. Okay, so now we have our week. We have our weeks with our individual weeks beneath it. And let's just call these maybe just our dates. Now what we need to do is look at how do we change the month. So with that, let's go ahead and add some elements here. So starting off with, let's just say, what are we now? We're September, Sept 2024. Okay, so body medium, let's set this to our text action, center that right in the middle. And now let's go ahead and add in some arrows here. So when it comes to your date picker, there's 2 different types of arrows that I like to add. I like to have one single type of arrow and then one double type of arrow. There we go. So something like that. Actually, those sizes don't line up. So we're gonna go bring in our small. There we go. So I like to have one. If maybe you just want to go like 1 month at a time, maybe that double arrow might go 2 at a time, so on and so forth. And let's then bring in the same for our left. Double left. There we go. So what we're going to do then is let's wrap all these together in an auto layout. Let's make sure that these are center aligned. And what we're going to do is just simply adjust the gap of those to 8. And then we're going to change all the colors of those icons to our icon action. There we go. And one thing you can also do as well, if you want to make them a little bit tighter is maybe if you want to just simply adjust these this gap to 4, just so they signify that they are a little bit closer together. And then this is going to be our month. Okay, so now let's go ahead. Let's select our dates. Let's select our weeks. Let's select our months. Wrap those in an auto layout. And let's just do some checks here. So this is at 8, but it looks like we have. Sorry, I'm just double checking something. Let's just simply drag this in. Let's drag it outside of our container in, add set to fix. There we go. So we set that to hug. We're looking pretty good. And then this will be our calendar. Let's then go ahead, add a fill, and we're going to change this to our surface primary. And then let's add some padding here. So we're going to start off maybe a 12 padding from the bottom, on the horizontally, 12 padding at the top. And now let's go ahead and maybe just make this a little bit more realistic. So we're going to set these 3 here to maybe our status blank, so those don't show. And then we can go with a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. Sorry, I know you're watching me this. 27, 28, 29. And let's say maybe there's only 29 days in this month. What we can do is we can go ahead and we can make these blank, or we can make them disabled as well, to sort of show that they're in that next month. Okay, but first is let's go ahead and change these to 1, 2, 3. There we go, to show that these are in the next month, and they're still the unselected. Maybe we can add the 8th here. This is going to be our selected, and there we go. I think we have a pretty good calendar component. One thing I might want to do as well is I might want to add a radius overall, radius of 4. You can also add a little bit of a stroke as well if you would like. Again, it's totally up to you and your design system how you want to do that. So maybe if you want to add a 1 pixel stroke, set that to your border primary. You can also add a drop shadow as well if you want. Let's go ahead, create the calendar of this. And now let's go ahead and just add in some properties here. So maybe what we might want to have here is the ability to hide our months altogether, so we can have our months. You might want to offer the ability to toggle that on and off if you don't want to offer that feature, and also to adjust the text of this as well. So maybe if you don't want to show the month, you can also add a layer property, but you can also add a text property for that month. I'm not going to do it for now, but it's something that you can also offer to spruce up your calendar just that much more. Okay, beautiful. So looks like we're in some pretty good shape with our calendar. Now let's go ahead and actually build out our date picker component. So now that we have our calendar component, let's go ahead and build out our date picker as a whole. So with that, let's go ahead and build another input. So let's bring in our label. Let's bring in our defined field this time, our defined field. Beautiful. Let's also hide our pre-tab, set our post tab to active, and then go with our calendar. And you're probably realizing by now that all of a sudden my Figma UI decided to update while I was filming this video, so about time, but I reverted back to the old one just until I get used to it. Let's also go ahead and add in hints, our hint copy, set that to our body medium. This is going to be our text disabled. Let's select all three, add some auto layout, set the gap to 8, and then make sure that's set to hug. This is set to fill. And let's call this our date picker. There we go. And then let's go ahead and create the component of this. Now, one thing that's kind of important to know here is I actually always like to have my date picker fields a certain width. So let's go ahead then and set this to fill. There we go. We might have to go back and update the main component for that. And the reason being is we want to have our date picker items always the same width. Because if I expand this out a little bit, what's going to happen if all your designers have different widths for their date picker, look what ends up happening is you'd have to go through adjust, set this to fill, and then all of a sudden your date picker items might have a little bit of a different width for each, designer. Some might have their date picker like this, some might have it much tighter, and that causes a lot of inconsistencies. It can cause a really big headache for designers. So I always like to have my date picker match the width of that calendar element. Again, you don't need to do it as such, but that's just like how I like to do things. So let's copy a symbol, and let's be sure to add in our layer property. So hint copy, hide that, and also the ability to change that hint copy because we can't have, two properties with the same name. Edit emojis and symbols. Let's go with our arrow, downward facing. There we go. So now, turn that on and off, and let's be sure to add in our properties. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead, add a variant now. There's just two main variants that we're going to work with here. So the first is our status variant, and this one is going to be our default. This value here will be our default. And then with our other variant here, this is just going to be our selected variant. So this is going to be our selected. And what I'm just going to do is simply just paste that in as such. And then there we have our selected. Awesome. So that is really it in terms of your date picker component. So you have your status default and then selected. One thing I'm not going to do is add nested instances for all the individual items. It's easier just to go through and click and adjust the item that you want instead of having to scroll through your properties to try to find the right value, especially when you have 25 plus different elements in here. So there you go. There you have it. There you have your date picker. Okay, now let's go ahead and build out our autocomplete. So we're going to go ahead and pull in some of the components that we just used. So things like a label, a defined field. There we go. And let's also be sure to add in our hint text as well. So our hint copy, set that to our text disabled. Let's group all three. Go ahead, add some auto layout there. And let's actually adjust here real quick. So let's make sure that gap is set to 8. Height there is set to hug. And let's adjust. So for something like an autocomplete, maybe you don't have that pre-tab. You might still have that post-tab that's set to active. And what's going on here? Maybe I made a mistake. There we go. Make sure that's set to hug. Make sure this is also set to hug. There we go. And then I'm going to change the icon here to something like a search. So you want to go ahead, and then you might have a search element. Picture like Google, you're searching for something, and that autocomplete is taking place. So let's go ahead and call this our autocomplete. Let's go ahead and create the component of this and start adjusting. So let's make sure this is set to fill, actually. We're also going to need our layer property, as we just did, for our hint copy, and then also our text property for our hint copy. Can't have two properties with the same name. So let's go ahead and add that downward facing arrow. There we go. And let's also go ahead and add in our nested instances as well. There we go. Okay, so there we have our initial autocomplete. Another thing that you can also do here, you can also add an X icon in here, leveraging. So if you have that icon right, you can change this to something like an X or close, whatever the value of the icon is, or close. There we go. Something like this to show that you can hit this and clear your input. There's another option as well, although it's not always mandatory, but we'll leave it like that. We'll leave it like that for now. Okay, so we have our autocomplete. Let's go ahead and add in a variant here. And with our variants, the other options are very similar to what we did with our defined field. Is we're going to bring back in our menu component that we built a little bit earlier on in this lesson. All right, and one thing I noticed here, we have a design bug where there's no fill set to the scroll bar. So I'm actually going to go ahead back into our menu components, and maybe you already realized that by now, but we didn't add a fill. So let's go ahead and adjust that. So we have a surface primary, we have a fill for our surface primary, and then we have our fill here for also our surface primary. So then let's go back into our autocomplete, and I can see that that is adjusted. And maybe I want to go ahead and just hide some of these to start. I have that option to do so. And then what I can do is just simply paste that in itself, set our component here to fill, so it fills that container. And then as the user's typing, they have something like an autocomplete menu that pops up. So in terms of status, let's be sure our property name. So let's change this to status. This here will be our default. And then this here will be our selected. There we go. And we can get rid of that. And then there we go. There we now have our autocomplete where we can select our default and then also our selected as well. All right. So now that we have all of our different form components, what you can do is actually go ahead and start building out fields that your designers might be able to leverage for specific use cases. We're just going to do one or two quick examples here. So maybe if we search for our input, something like this. Let's go ahead, hide this hint copy. Say we have, we'll go this way. So we have, let's say this is our first name. This here is our last name. Let's hide the tooltips for both of these. Let's hide our icon lefts and our icon rights. Let's say maybe we have an email right here. So let's hide the tooltip for that. Let's hide the icon rights. Maybe we set this to an email. Something like this. Let's go ahead. We'll drag that out for now. We have an email. You might also have a phone number. So set this to a phone. Something like that. We can change the label here to a phone number. And then let's go say maybe you have a checkbox as well. And again, this might not be the best looking form, but just to show you how all these components come together. Check label, I agree to receive marketing emails, something like that. Expand this out a bit. Go set this to fill. There we go. And then maybe we might have an item here. So contact us. Set this to your heading, maybe a 4, something like that. Let's go ahead and add some auto layout here. There we go. Let's also be sure to add in a button. There we go. And change this button to something like submit. And then maybe we add in a little arrow on the right just to add some flavor to it. If I can find one that I like. There we go. Arrow right for submit. All right, now let's go ahead. Let's wrap all these in an auto layout. Let's set this to maybe 24 by 24. Let's see what's happening here. So let's be sure to set both of these to fill and fill. Let's go ahead, add a fill here to our surface primary. Maybe we want to change the radius here to 4. Maybe just simply add a small stroke. So a border primary. And then there you might have a contact form that your designers can leverage. So contact us. Go ahead and create the component of this. And be sure to add all your nested instances properties. So maybe if you want to add all these in for your input, depending on how long your field is, you have that option. So designers, when they hit once, they can go ahead and adjust all those awesome properties that we built. So again, there's a quick example as to how you can build out your forms, leveraging all the components that we've built in the last 2 episodes.